First of all, who asked for this? Everyone who saw the first Gladiator. And I can't believe I have to call it the first Gladiator, by the way. Who thought by the end of that emotional journey, I can't wait for the sequel? Nobody. Unless you're Ridley Scott. There was honestly no need for this movie. I wasn't anticipating this because it didn't make any sense to be made in the first place. The first trailer was a joke. Oh, Denzel is in this. Put the rap music in. We need the urban demographic to rack in the numbers. It did nothing to sway my stubbornness about this unnecessary sequel. It was a damning indictment on the state of Hollywood. Every major studio is obsessed with safe projects that are attached to some existing property as opposed to something original. And now, after having seen this movie, I can confirm that this is one of the most pointless, unnecessary movies I have ever seen. It's not a terrible movie, it's not good either. But above all, it doesn't do anything to justify why it was made, apart from being an easy cash grab. Yeah, it's just inferior to the original in every way. I mean really inferior. It doesn't even come close. Now you can argue on one hand, why don't I just enjoy it for what it is? It's not that deep. Sit back, relax, and revel in this epic bloodsport action festival. And yeah, the action is the highlight of the film. They were all well choreographed, viciously violent, and hugely entertaining. And the production and costumes were outstanding. Those were major positives. The performances were solid, but never really stayed with me. The biggest comparison between this movie and the first is that the first Gladiator was built on emotional depth and stern through the script and the performances of the cast. Without these elements, only the production values and cinematography would be worth marveling at. In Gladiator II, it is only the production and action that can be praised. The performances just couldn't provide that same level of emotion, and it's not the fault of the actors, it's all to do with the script. I didn't really care about anyone in this movie. Our main hero, Lucius, was not anywhere near as engaging as Maximus. He didn't have that presence about him, dare I say it, that aura. You see, Maximus, you knew from the start what an honourable person he was. He was the greatest general and servant to Rome. But he only really cared about his family, and this was all very well established and developed when we see that everything he loved is taken away from him, and his path is set with justice and revenge, and we as an audience are there to root for him. In Lucius's case, the development of his motives were not as strong. The impact of him losing his loved one was kind of not that heartbreaking. It was predictable, that's for sure. You knew he was going to go down the same path as Maximus in more or less the same way. That was what really annoyed me. They kept going down the same rabbit hole time and time again. He loses his family, he becomes a slave/gladiator, he seeks vengeance against the corrupt Romans who killed his family, and it's executed with underwhelming results. No emotional weight and no originality. It became tiresome. You knew what was going to happen next, which made the surprise not so surprising. So just like the original, Lucius is bought by a former slave called Macrinus, played by Denzel Washington, who seeks to overthrow Rome and bring it into chaos. Now this is a part of the story that I commend for going into a different direction. They also do this with Pedro Pascal's character. He is not bad at all. But in particular, Denzel's character was by far the most interesting character in the movie. I would have liked more screen time for him for that reason. Every scene he was in, he commanded with elegance and devious grace. Some people say he seemed out of place, but I didn't think that at all. He was almost acting in a Shakespearean way, which was very reminiscent of the performances in the original Gladiator. The only gripe I had was that I didn't really get that excited by his motives or feel much sympathy towards him. I didn't feel anything towards any of the characters. But because he was the most engaging, I would have liked a backstory, a flashback or something along those lines. Then it would add more gravitas to his character, presenting the long and arduous journey he has overcome from past to present. But they didn't do this, because this movie felt incredibly devoid of emotion. The only time it did get emotional was when the manipulative music and clips from the original would play. I know that Hans Zimmer didn't return for this, and a wise decision that was. But they kept playing that famous score from the first, and I knew they were going to use it for pivotal moments because this new score was not memorable at all. And I hated how it just manipulated me to try and care about what was happening on screen. And then show clips of Russell Crowe as Maximus to connect with Lucius. It didn't work. It just came off as obnoxious towards the first one. I really couldn't connect with the characters and their motivations. The actors do a good job with their performance, but the writers did nothing to help elevate their performances. What I'm basically saying is that the writers are at fault. Now, like every sequel ever made, the producers are always thinking, how do we raise the stakes? How do we make this more epic than the first? Think bigger, think more action, more characters. Instead of one evil emperor, let's have two, and they're twins, and they're even crazier than Commodus. but not anywhere near as nuanced or compelling as Joaquin Phoenix's portrayal of Commodus. That's all Gladiator II was doing. It was trying to make everything bigger, more riskier, which is ambitious, but the route they go borders on the ridiculous. As you saw in the trailer, the Colosseum was filled with water and naval ships. I have heard stories that the Romans did go crazy and fill it with water, and it was a fun sequence, although quite short lived, maybe because of budget constraints. The rhino sequence was great though. It didn't look fake at all, quite realistic when they added a nice touch of bloodstains on the rhino's horn. But what did look fake was those god awful baboons that Lucius fights near the start of the film. It was terrible CGI. I know baboons are quite fierce and violent creatures, but when you saw them up close, it just didn't look real at all. And the way they moved was so over the top. Apart from the rhino, the rest of the CG animals were terrible. In the Colosseum, there were sharks which just looked like something out of Sharknado, the way they were aimlessly implemented into the water. You may think I'm being harsh on this movie, but I have every reason to be this critical because all this money was spent on something that had no reason to be made, when really it could have been used for something original. Gladiator II is not a bad movie, it has its moments, but is overall a pretty mediocre experience and just shows how incredible the first one really was. In terms of awards, I think this will definitely get nominated for production and costume design. I can't really look beyond that. It's definitely not getting visual effects where there's abhorrent baboons, and it's most certainly not getting Best Picture. If it does, then the Academy need new members. Yeah, 5 out of 10, just a mid movie that offers nothing we haven't seen from the first.